In this last module, we'll be talking about client satisfaction and how each program can go about gathering this data from your clients. We'll be referencing the guide for conducting voluntary consumer satisfaction surveys developed by the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development Office of HIV and AIDS Housing. The Consumer Satisfaction Survey, developed by the Office of HIV and AIDS Housing, is a tool intended to support HOPWA grantees by involving consumers in the consultations on program planning using feedback on the quality and content of service delivery. The survey is meant to be 100% voluntary, and no confidential personal information is requested. Feedback from consumers is intended to help HOPWA grantees and project sponsors identify program strengths and weaknesses, make quality improvements, and foster better client outcomes. Under no circumstances should HOPWA services be contingent upon participation in the survey by otherwise eligible. The survey tools provided have been designed to establish residents' level of satisfaction in 4 domains. 1. Overall satisfaction with the program providing the housing and/or services. 2. Satisfaction with staff of the program. 3. Satisfaction with case management and/or housing advocacy services. And lastly, satisfaction with housing quality and property management services, or also known as facility-based housing. There are a total of 42 elements comprising both multiple choice and open-ended questions. The final 4, which are optional, asks some basic demographic questions to help determine how well survey respondents mirror the overall demographic composition of the community and program. The survey is available in English and Spanish. HOPWA grantees can download copies of the master survey in English and Spanish from the link below. The master survey documents can be customized for each local region by adding logos in the header and including the address and deadline for returning completed surveys. The master survey documents can be utilized to create an online format through a number of websites such as SurveyMonkey, Quick Surveys, Buru, and Zoomerang, to mention a few. These entities provide a variety of survey templates available in an online format. The Department of Housing and Urban Development does not endorse any particular survey product. Some, but not all, HOPWA programs have in place mechanisms for soliciting input and feedback from residents and consumers. This can include resident advisory groups that are standing bodies composed of program clients and residents who have volunteered to participate, or perhaps to advise on the design and implementation of program services. If this is the case in your agency, then this group would be a good place to start in terms of building an environment that leads to high response rates for your survey. Their buy-in and involvement will be a strong motivator for others in the community, especially if these consumer representatives make personal investments in getting their peers to participate. Equally important in getting buy-in from staff, in addition to mailing surveys to all residents receiving HOPWA assistance, it makes sense to ask frontline staff members to play an active role in survey distribution and marketing. Senior management will also need to endorse the survey project. Of course, the primary reason for conducting the survey is to assure that the agency's customers are satisfied with the services that they are receiving, whether housing, case management, or other supportive services. Agency leaders, both board and staff, are typically quite eager to gain this information, and they can use it to directly bolster fundraising appeals, as well as to explore ways to improve the quality of the program. The higher the response rate, the more certainty there is that responses are reflective of the whole. So management should see that Wisdom is doing the best job possible to elicit consumer input and feedback. It is important to determine and define period of time in which the survey will be collected. For example, 2 to 6 weeks. One advantage to having a short turnaround period for surveying is that you can build it up as a community-wide activity and treat it like a campaign with all hands on deck. 2 weeks later, survey collection is over. You celebrate your consumers' participation and move quickly into analysis. Within a reasonable period, 1 to 2 weeks, you can distribute and post the results of your survey. If possible, have the community report back meeting scheduled when you begin survey distribution. That way, consumers will see that you're serious about holding yourselves accountable for both sharing and acting on the feedback you receive. What can you do to boost your survey response rates? Here are some suggestions and methods. It is quite common and also respectful of the value and time of the consumer to offer some kind of incentives for survey participation. This could be in the form of a gift card for a meal or a movie, but should not be paid for by Hopwell funds. Rather, you can utilize unrestricted funding or donations. Other ways to boost the response rate is to conduct follow-up with additional mailings or a personal phone call, reminding each client to please consider completing the survey. Frontline staff can also be very helpful, talking up the survey process by explaining how helpful it is to hear from the consumers and reminding them that their responses will help improve the quality and appropriateness of the housing services they receive. If you notice that the response rate is low, then the first thing you want to do is reach out in some way with words of encouragement. Personal contact is best. Going door to door is not out of the question. Phone calls and letters can also work. If these methods are utilized, measures to protect consumer confidentiality must be considered. For those receiving the survey electronically, you can send follow-up emails. You may also decide to extend the deadline for completion and notify consumers of the change. There is no magic to response rates. Blind mailings rarely get responses higher than 2%, but if you personally ask people close to you to do it and you remind them, you'll get a much higher rate. Remember, some of the best test sites had response rates of 10%, 22%, and nearly 95%. Warmth, encouragement, incentives, and peer pressure all work. The timeline utilized by each program is going to vary, but here you can see a simple timeline for distributing the consumer satisfaction survey. This sample timeline includes determining survey release dates, preparing the materials, getting the word out, distributing the survey, sending out reminders, gathering the survey, conducting the data analysis, and reviewing findings with stakeholders and staff. It's important to look not only at the quantitative results that come from aggregating the surveys, but also at the narrative comments in each section. It's not unusual to have 1 or 2 people who come across as negative or disgruntled in a narrative response. However, reading through the narrative comments can provide additional insight. Often it's an aspect of another service, but they can't see the difference, or have tried to resolve it with a provider unsuccessfully, so they're telling you about it. In other cases, you could discover that staff may not be communicating effectively, which can lead to misconceptions in consumer expectations and the limits of the program design. In fact, there are so many possible causes that it might make sense to set up a community meeting for those consumers who receive the housing and/or other program services in question to provide an open forum to talk about the survey results and gather more clarity. You might also convene 1 or more focus groups of consumers to drill down to specifics, while allowing participants the options to express their personal opinions more freely. Again, your openness in gathering detailed consumer input while protecting confidentiality helps demonstrate your commitment to delivering services well. Sometimes the cause of the indignation is out of your control. In those cases, it's important to communicate to consumers that you're on their side and working as hard as you can to mitigate the issue. Again, ask for their suggestions and input on what can make it better for them. You may discover that there are numerous steps that you could take. This concludes Module 5. Complete both the short activity below and the assessment to review key concepts of Module 5.